Most men think it's all about performance, about pressure, about technique. But that's the lie, the grand delusion. The truth is far deeper, far darker, far more divine. You see, a woman doesn't open because your hands are fast or your moves are clever. She opens because your presence enters her world like a storm cloaked in stillness. Her walls don't fall from friction. They melt in the heat of your awareness. And until a man understands that, he's not making love. He's just performing. Because orgasm isn't something you give her. It's something you unlock. With presence, depth, and the unshakable gravity of a man who has made peace with his own chaos. She doesn't surrender to technique, she surrenders to truth. This is where it begins, not in the body, but in the psyche, in the sacred battlefield between her fear of losing control and her desperate longing to be seen, to be taken without being harmed, to be ravished without being erased. And you are either the storm she'll beg to drown in, or the reason she closes herself tighter. A woman's orgasm lives in her nervous system, yes, but also in her story, her shadows, her shame. And you, whether you know it or not, are stepping into a cathedral haunted by every man who touched her without touching her soul. And if you are not ready to be the man who sees her entirely, who tastes her pain like wine and doesn't flinch, then don't touch her at all, because she remembers, even if she never says it out loud. It starts before you ever lay a finger on her, in the way your eyes devour her without hunger. In the way your voice slows time, in the way your energy says, you are safe here, but not untouched. Because a woman's orgasm isn't just climax, it's trust. It's the collapse of every mask she's ever worn for the world. It's her body saying, I believe you won't leave me in the middle of this. And you, man, you must earn that collapse. How? By collapsing your own masks first. By surrendering your need to perform, to impress, to win. That need is your weakness. That need is your prison. That need is the very thing making her fake what she should be free to feel. She can feel your neediness even through silence, especially through silence. But when a man is rooted, when he breathes from his belly and doesn't seek applause, when he touches her like a musician plays the last song of his life, she feels it, and her body begins to bloom, not out of duty, not out of pressure, but because nature responds to truth. You cannot fake presence. You cannot think your way into her climax. You must be it. You must become the safe house for her wildness, the mirror for her madness, the fire that refuses to burn her but insists on purifying her. And that doesn't come from porn scripts or locker room tricks. It comes from your essence, from the unshakable stillness inside a man who's done his shadow work, who's confronted his own helplessness, his own shame, his own unworthiness. A man who's made peace with rejection, with silence, with the ache of his own unmet desires. Because when you stop needing her to respond a certain way, she will. When you stop chasing the finish line, she will run toward it, not to please you, but to meet herself in a place only you could guide her to. And she will not forget that man. Because that kind of man does not just give her pleasure, he gives her permission to scream, to cry, to forget her name, to find God in the palms of someone who never asked her to be anyone else. She will never speak of it in exact terms, not to her friends, not to her therapist. Because there are no words for the man who didn't just touch her body, but touched the part of her that thought it could never be touched again. He didn't conquer her. He witnessed her. He didn't take. He revealed. That is the secret no one tells you, that a woman's deepest orgasm has little to do with climax and everything to do with recognition. The moment her breath catches, not because of stimulation, but because her soul feels understood. When your presence penetrates further than your body ever could. She's been with men who moved quickly, who wanted the evidence of their success, moans, spasms, screams. But the ones she remembers, the ones that rewired her cells, those were the men who moved like time didn't exist. Men who moved with her, not at her. Men who made her feel like she was the center of gravity, not an obstacle to get past. You cannot fake this kind of devotion. You cannot simulate this depth. You must become a man who listens with his whole being, who hears what her lips don't say, who feels the moment her body tenses and pauses, not to fix it, not to get back on track, but to honor it. Because a man who honors the ebb as much as the flow becomes unforgettable. You see, women don't want perfection. They want presence. Not pressure, not performance. Presence. Because presence heals what performance wounds. It's what tells her body you're not being watched, you're being worshipped. And worship is not blind, it is aware. It pays attention, it adjusts, it listens, it doesn't demand results, it stays with. And when a man learns this, truly learns it, he stops seeing sex as a transaction and start seeing it as transformation, a ritual, a reclamation, the sacred destruction of masks. You become less interested in did she finish and more in did she vanish. Did she disappear into that primal divine place where she is nothing but pulse and breath and moan and silence and release? Because that's where her truth lives, not in performance, but in surrender. And no woman can surrender in the presence of a man who still needs to prove something. So you must go inward first. You must strip yourself of the layers of performance that your father taught you, that culture taught you, that shame taught you. You must learn to hold yourself through your awkwardness, through your fear of inadequacy, through the trembling in your own chest when her breath catches and you don't know what to do next. Because here's the truth. There will be moments where you don't know, where you feel lost in the swirl of her emotions, her edges, her sudden stillness. And in those moments, she's watching you, not to see if you're perfect, but to see if you'll stay, to see if you'll collapse back into self-doubt or if you'll remain the container that can hold her storm. This is the warrior's path, the erotic monk's devotion, the sacred masculine returned. She doesn't want you to dominate her. She wants you to devote to her depth. Not to please her ego, but to speak to her soul, to say without words, I am here, all of me, and I will not run from any part of you, because when you show up like that, she will finish. She will explode, collapse, rise, and disappear. She will forget her own name and remember her own body. Not because you made her orgasm, but because you made her feel safe enough to let go of control. And that is the rarest thing a woman can feel. And when a woman lets go of control, what she's truly releasing is the armor the world made her wear. The armor of being too much, too loud, too wet, too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, too hungry. That armor wraps itself around her hips, her thighs, her breath, her voice, and only a certain kind of man, the kind who holds space without fear, without rush, without agenda, can coax that armor off with silence alone. He doesn't need dirty talk to arouse her. His stillness is louder than words. His fingertips say, you are safe to fall apart here. And so she does. She collapses into the infinite. And in that collapse, her body becomes something ancient, something holy, something fierce. Understand this, her orgasm isn't just a spasm. It's a ritual purge, a flushing out of every man who ever made her perform. Every time she faked it to be liked. Every moment she felt unseen, untouched, misunderstood in her own skin. When she finishes with you, she is not just climaxing, she is coming home. But there's a price to pay for this kind of access. And the price is you, your ego, your self-importance, your lust for control. You don't get to lead her into pleasure and stay small. You must stretch into discomfort, hold presence through her tears, through her rage, through her trembling. Because if you flee when it gets messy, she will never trust you again. And she will never go there again, not with you. She may still moan, still kiss, still say yes, but she won't open. And once a woman closes that door, you can't force it open. But if you stay, if you remain unshaken through the flood, if you meet her chaos with your grounded thunder, then something happens, something irreversible. She becomes yours, not in ownership, not in submission, but in remembrance, because you reminded her who she was before the world told her to be small. And for that, she will crave you. Not like a fling, not like a habit, but like a mirror she didn't know she was missing. She'll crave the man who slowed down when others rushed, who asked not how to make her orgasm, but how to make her remember herself. And you will no longer hunger for validation, because what you will witness in her eyes, when she looks at you after the shattering, that sacred, raw gaze of wonder and surrender, will be enough to rewrite your bones. It won't be about every time anymore, because you'll realize something deeper. That orgasm is not the destination. It's the echo of truth fully lived, of presence fully felt, of love, not romance, but reverence. You didn't make her come. You invited her home. But the question now is, can you hold her after she comes undone? Because what most men misunderstand is this. Her orgasm is not the end. It's the beginning of a deeper unraveling, of emotion, of memory, of vulnerability, long buried beneath layers of cultural shame and silent betrayal. Her climax opens the gates, yes, but it also floods the room with everything she's been carrying, everything she never dared feel, until now, until you. So the moment after is just as holy as the moment before. If you roll away, if you grab your phone, if you check out, she will close, not her legs, her heart. And once a woman closes her heart after offering it wide open, she bleeds inside. Because you didn't just miss a chance for round two, you missed the real point. Presence doesn't end when the fireworks do. If anything, it matters more afterward, when she curls into your chest, not to be coddled, but to be kept. When her breath is erratic, and her skin hums with electricity and exposure, and all she needs is your steady inhale to tell her you are still safe, you are still sacred, you are still seen. That right there is the difference between a boy and a man. A boy chases orgasms like they're trophies. A man creates temples with his touch. And when she lies beside you, bones soft, heart wide, and you hold her like something precious and powerful, she will crave you. Because the truth is, the physical orgasm was only part of it. The real high was being witnessed, not for what she could give, but for who she became in your presence. She became feral, free, forgotten, remembered. She became wind and howl and tide and song, and when the world calls her back to being polite, quiet, well-behaved, she will ache for the man who said, "Be wild here. I can hold it, but there's more still." Because the path of the man who makes her orgasm every time is not just about what he can give her, it's about what he no longer needs from her. You see, most men are still seeking their worth through a woman's moans, still trying to outrun the voice in their own head that says, "You're not enough." But the man who enters a woman without needing to be affirmed by her response, that man is dangerous, not because he manipulates, but because he's free. He doesn't need her climax to validate him. He doesn't need her praise to feel powerful. He is the mountain that remains, before, during, and after the storm. And in that stillness she finds herself. Because when a woman comes in the arms of a man like that, a man who does not chase approval, who does not flinch at her shadow, she doesn't just feel good, she feels reborn. That is the orgasm no one teaches you about, the one where her soul lets go of the past, the one that says, "I didn't know it could be like this," the one that makes her stare at the ceiling afterward and whisper, "Who was that?" Not because she doesn't recognize you, but because in your arms she finally recognized herself, and in that recognition, something irreversible occurs. She no longer desires men who take. She no longer chases the thrill of chaos, the high of being desired but never known. Because you showed her something rare, not dominance, but depth, not pressure, but presence, not performance, but penetration, of the spirit, not just the skin. And once a woman tastes that, every other touch feels shallow, every other kiss empty, because her body remembers, not just the orgasm, but the feeling of being honored. She becomes more selective, more sovereign, more silent around the boys who once made her laugh, because a woman who has been deeply seen no longer tolerates being glanced at. And the man who gave her that vision, he becomes etched into her, not as a name, not as a notch, but as a mirror. She'll think of you in quiet moments, in hotel rooms where she doesn't finish, in beds with men who breathe too loud, move too fast, leave too soon. She'll think of you not because of the orgasm, but because of what she became in your presence. Because you didn't just undress her, you undid her. You dismantled the scaffolding she thought she needed. You stripped away the numbness that kept her safe but lifeless. And when she moaned, really moaned, it wasn't for you, it was for her. For the girl who was once ashamed of her hunger. For the woman who was told her pleasure was too loud, too long, too much. She moaned because you made room for her entire being. And that kind of space, that kind of sacred holding, it doesn't just make her orgasm, it makes her heal. But don't confuse this power. It's not about being her savior. It's not about pride or conquest. It's about devotion to truth, to presence, to becoming the kind of man who doesn't just want her body, but who honors what her body holds. Because her body is a history book, a battlefield, a temple, a map. And when you trace it with reverence, not greed, when you follow its tremors like a priest reading scripture, you learn more than any book could ever teach. You learn the rhythm of trust, the breath before surrender, the stillness between pleasure and grief. Because sometimes when she comes, she'll cry. Not because she's sad, but because something old just died, something heavy just left. And in its place, a new self was born. You held her through that. You didn't flinch. You didn't run. You didn't need it to look sexy. You let it be sacred. That's the real secret. The man who makes her orgasm every time doesn't aim for the orgasm. He aims for truth, and the body follows. And this truth, it doesn't whisper, it roars. It speaks through her trembling, through the silence after her scream, through the way she clutches the bedsheet, not to hold on, but to release. Release what the world told her to carry. Release what she hid in the creases of her spine. Release the version of herself that only knew how to please, but never to feel. Because in your arms she isn't a performance, she's a force, not an object of pleasure, but a vessel of divinity, trembling with centuries of silenced screams finally given permission to erupt. And that is not casual. That is not something a man gives because he's smooth. It's not something you unlock with lines or lingerie. It's earned through discipline, through presence, through the crucifixion of ego, through every moment you sat in your own discomfort and refused to numb it, through every shameful secret you brought into the light and said, "This is part of me, and I still choose to be whole." Because only a whole man can hold a woman in her holy unraveling. And this unraveling, it is art. It is spiritual violence in reverse. It is the tearing down of what never belonged, brick by brick, until all that remains is truth, raw, naked, breathing in your palm, and now you know. Now you understand that making her orgasm every time has nothing to do with skill and everything to do with self. The work was never about how to please her. It was about how deeply you've met yourself, because a man who's never wept in his own loneliness cannot hold her tears. A man who fears his shadow cannot guide her through hers. And a man who hides from his own body cannot liberate hers. But when you face yourself, when you strip down emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, when you crawl into the parts of you that felt unwanted, unseen, unworthy, and stay, then you become the kind of man who can see her, really see her. And when she is seen, fully, unapologetically, her body becomes a storm. Not a storm to survive, but one you summon. Because you are no longer afraid of being consumed. You welcome the fire, you trust the tide. Because you know what lies on the other side of chaos, clarity. That's what orgasm truly is. It's not just a wave of pleasure, it's the soul's return to stillness after the quake. And you are the ground she lands on. The man who never flinched, the man who stayed. And so she finishes, every time, not because you chased it, but because you allowed it. You gave her space and presence and breath and reverence. And now, when she thinks of you, she won't remember the angle of your hands or the pace of your rhythm. She'll remember the silence, the power, the moment when time disappeared, and so did she. And when she returned, she was new. The man who knows his worth doesn't chase. He chooses.